Welcome to our second episode of Mosaic. I wanted to start with a quick discussion of why we designed the Mosaic logo like we did. Holiness is such a huge topic, and often the descriptions or definition of holiness don't really help us on the path toward the goal of being more holy. Things like, God is holy, so being more holy is being more like God, doesn't help much. Josh explained last week, our take on holiness comes from St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians about love. We wanted to examine some of the various aspects of love and see where we find the kernel of holiness within each of them. When we put together all the different elements that we find in individual saints and individual pieces of holiness, we get a wider picture that points us to God in a more holistic way. This is like how the individual cells of a mosaic are made up of an individual color, but when you put them together, you get a picture that can be very helpful. By looking at individual virtues and individual saints, we get pieces of the puzzle that we can then assemble into a larger image of what God is calling us to. Virtue can be defined as moral excellence in a person or a particular good moral quality. Now, another way of putting that is that virtues are characteristics that promote collective and individual greatness. I like how that last one has both the individual and the bigger picture aspects in it. In Catholic tradition, virtues are more than just good habits. They're spiritual traits that draw us closer to God. And today, the virtue that I would like to talk about is kindness. Kindness, in particular, resonates deeply within the faith because it perfectly mirrors God's unconditional love for humanity. We hear in 1 John chapter 4, and actually Josh shared this with us last week, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone who loves is born of God and knows God. He who does not love does not know God, for God is love." How much we love determines how well we know God. Therefore, the more we know God, the more love will flow through our life. One of the ways that we recognize this love is as kindness. Kindness is a fruit of the Spirit, and the fruits of the Spirit are the character traits of the Spirit of God that lives in us. When we are truly living in this Spirit, we will see these fruits in ourselves and in our lives. So kindness involves care, charity, compassion, generosity, helpfulness, mercy, and understanding. Kindness is being gentle, thoughtful, and it's forgiving at times when it would be so easy to be angry. It can mean involvement when the inconvenience of a situation would seem to justify non-involvement. Kindness much prefers considerateness to anger, and it lifts the spirits and touches the hearts of the people that we encounter in our lives. Jesus was our very best teacher of how to treat others kindly in order to serve him. In both Matthew and Luke, we encounter Jesus teaching the golden rule, where we do unto others as we would have them do unto us. This philosophy did not originate with Jesus, as it is a timeless ethical principle advocating empathy and respect, but it is such an important underpinning of what Jesus shares with us. And we hear about how we are to treat others when Jesus lays the foundation for the corporal works of mercy, when he says, "Whatever you did for one of these least of my brothers, you did for me." And then he identifies the least as anyone who is hungry, thirsty, a stranger, naked, sick, or in prison. Also, the story of the Good Samaritan explains what it means to love our neighbor as ourselves and who our neighbor might be. When we practice kindness, we demonstrate the love of Jesus. And kindness isn't just for us as individuals. Acting kindly also helps build up the community around us. It builds trust and goodwill, developing a supportive and nurturing environment. When we act in a selfless manner, making the deliberate choice to extend grace to others, we uplift those around us and enable them to also act selflessly. Authentic kindness has the power to make other people's lives more bearable and less miserable, to repair damaged self-esteem in a person, and even to produce joy and happiness in souls. One thing to keep in mind, being kind is very different from being nice. Kindness is a genuine, compassionate act driven by empathy, while niceness is often a superficial, polite behavior aimed at social acceptance. And there are several key differences. The first is intent and motivation. Kindness comes from a place of genuine care and empathy, and it involves selflessly helping others without expecting anything in return. Niceness, on the other hand, is often motivated by social expectations and the desire to be liked or to avoid conflict. And it can manifest as polite behavior such as saying thank you or smiling even when you don't really feel it genuinely. Next is the depth of interaction. Kindness tends to create deeper, more meaningful connections. It often involves vulnerability and a willingness to engage with others on a more profound level, even if it means facing discomfort. Niceness may lead to superficial interactions. While it can make social situations more pleasant, it often lacks the depth or authenticity that kindness provides. Third is our impact on the relationships. Kindness can inspire others and create a ripple effect of positive behavior. Acts of kindness often encourage others to pay it forward, fostering a supportive community. Niceness may not really leave a lasting impression. While it can smooth over social interactions, it might not lead to anything meaningful or change or any connection. And finally, we have authenticity. Kindness is seen as more authentic because it aligns our intentions with our actions. When someone acts kindly, their behavior reflects a true desire to help others. Niceness can sometimes be perceived as insincere, especially if it's used as a facade to mask true feelings or intentions. For example, somebody might act nice to avoid confrontation rather than out of a genuine concern for the other person. In summary, while kindness and niceness may appear to be similar, they differ significantly in intent, depth, and impact on relationships. Kindness is rooted in empathy and genuine care, whereas niceness often serves social functions and can lack authenticity. One final thing to keep in mind is that being kind does not mean being a doormat. We can be, and we are called to be, direct and honest while still being kind. Your Spark leaders now have some questions for you to discuss. So, how does being kind lead to holiness? In the New Testament, Jesus develops the idea of holiness, emphasizing the importance of inner purity and righteousness rather than mere external observances, hearkening back to the difference again between being kind and being nice. And it also involves being set apart from the sinful values of the world and seeking to become more Christ-like in character and lifestyle. Kindness is a fundamental aspect of holiness as it reflects the nature of God and is a direct result of a genuine relationship with Him. It's not merely a virtue, but it's a path to evangelization of others and our own inner transformation. By displaying kindness, we embody the virtues of Christ and become reflections of God's unconditional love. This kind of behavior is not only a reflection of our character, but also a means of spreading the light of the gospel in a world that often lacks compassion and hope. Kindness is one of the ways that Jesus calls us to love one another and reflect the compassionate nature of God. So why do we turn to the saints when we want to learn about kindness leading to holiness? Because their life stories are not just historical accounts of people who lived a long time ago. Instead, they are vibrant calls to action, inspiring us to embrace kindness as a core principle in our lives. We are encouraged to live with greater empathy, benevolence, and love toward all of creation. There is not just one patron saint of kindness, and that lets us look at a lot of different saints. So the first one is Saint Veronica. Veronica, which means true image, is not mentioned in the Bible, but is known to us by Catholic tradition, especially in the sixth station of the cross. Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. Legend states that as Christ was walking to Calvary, his face dripping with sweat and blood, Veronica, a bystander, was moved with compassion. She approached Jesus and offered him a cloth, likely her veil, which he accepted and used to wipe his face. The image of his face was subsequently imprinted on the cloth. There are no legends from the period which actually speak of Veronica either before or after this act of compassion. We don't know when she was born or when she died. She is literally lost to history. However, her act of kindness is pretty up front and center. She should be the patron saint of involvement when the inconvenience or danger of a situation would seem to justify non-involvement. It demonstrates to us that our acts of compassion can bring us into the presence of the divine, recognizing Jesus within each one of us. The jolly figure of Santa Claus finds its deep roots in the historical person of St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop who was known for his extraordinary generosity and his acts of kindness. Living in what is now modern-day Turkey, St. Nicholas had a strong desire to support those in need, earning him immense respect among Christians. Numerous legends recount his remarkable generosity, providing dowries for impoverished young women so that they wouldn't be forced into slavery, and secretly delivering bags of gold to poor families. His most famous acts involved, surprise, giving gifts discreetly, desiring no recognition for himself. St. Nicholas's legacy reminds us that genuine kindness often manifests in selfless giving, quietly offering help where it's needed most, without expectation of reward. The correct way of pronouncing our next saint is Saint Therese of Lisieux. However, I had a childhood friend who was named after Saint Therese, but I knew her as Therese, so I'm going to use the pronunciation Therese. So Saint Therese of Lisieux, who is also affectionately known as the Little Flower, is a doctor of the Church. And this is a title given by the Catholic Church to saints who are recognized as having made a significant contribution to theology or doctrine through their research, their studies, or their writings. And right now, there are 38 doctors of the Church. Therese's parents, Louis and Zélie Martin, are also saints. They had 5 daughters who all became nuns. Therese went into the convent at about the age of 13. And she deliberately sought out the company of those nuns whose temperament she found hardest to bear. She said, "What merit was there in acting charitably toward people whom one loved naturally?" Therese went out of her way to spend time and therefore to love the people she found repellent, because she knew it required more of a sacrifice that she could offer up to Jesus out of her love and devotion to him. "Kindness is my only guiding star," she wrote in her diary. In order to attain holiness and to express her love of God, she believed that it was not necessary to accomplish heroic acts or great deeds. And she wrote, "Love proves itself by deeds, so how am I to show my love? Great deeds are forbidden me. The only way I can prove my love is by scattering flowers, and these flowers are every little sacrifice, every glance and word, and the doing of the least actions for love." The saints' little way of love and Christian spirituality encourages us to love and serve God with a childlike trust in his eternal goodness. Therese passed away when she was only 24 years old, but she spent her brief time in this world being genuinely kind to those around her, and above all, to Jesus. Ron Garan, who was on the Discovery space shuttle mission in 2008, took a relic of St. Therese with him up into space, which had been given to him by the Carmelites of New Caney, Texas. The Carmelites based this on the wish of Therese to preach the gospel on all 5 continents simultaneously and even to the most remote isles. So now we can answer the question, yes, there have been relics and saints in the stars. There are lots of saints who epitomize kindness. St. Francis of Assisi was revered for his profound love for all creatures and for all creation, and he has become a universal symbol of kindness and peace. Mother Teresa of Calcutta was a living testament to radical kindness, serving those that society had forgotten or neglected. St. Francis de Sales, a highly educated nobleman, gave up his wealth and comfort and risked his life to do God's will as a dedicated holy priest. One of the many ways that he demonstrated his kindness toward others was by being determined to overcome his bad temper. So we can, even with bad tempers, we can still be kind and work toward that. Since we are called to act in the spirit of kindness, what are some ways that we can cultivate kindness in our own lives? Some more general recommendations first. Practice patience in your everyday life, both with people you know and those who are strangers. Listen actively, truly hearing and understanding others. Be generous with your time, your talent, your treasure. Be forgiving, extending mercy even to those who don't deserve it. And be compassionate, recognizing and responding to the suffering of others. Since kindness is an act of love, and true love does what is best for the other person, our acts of kindness should be things that will really benefit others, things that you would want someone to do for you, things that Jesus would do or would approve of. As St. Therese often pointed out, grand gestures are not required. Rather, small, consistent acts of love, empathy, and service in our daily lives will do. Some examples of these simple acts of kindness are things like letting someone else have the closer parking spot. I know. Be patient and pray with someone who is struggling or making your life difficult. Talk to or listen to someone who appears lonely. Console someone who is hurting or upset. Visit someone in the nursing home or the hospital or who is homebound. Compliment or thank someone for doing a good job or something that was difficult or a dirty job. Thank them for that. Recognize that. Give school supplies, gift cards, haircuts, etc. to a needy family. Invite someone to go with you to confession or to go to Mass. And pray for help being kind. Often just asking for the Lord to step in and help us see those places where we can be kind to others will open up our eyes to all of the possibilities out there. And be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself more harshly than you would judge others. Give yourself some mercy and grace. And be grateful. Being kind is seeing and acknowledging the efforts of others. We'll pause here again to discuss how you can incorporate more acts of kindness into your lives. On a more personal level, there are 2 saints that have been a part of my life since I was a kid. The first is St. Anthony of Padua. St. Anthony lived in Portugal, and eventually he ended up becoming a Franciscan priest. He is most known today for being a finder of lost items. St. Anthony had a book of Psalms that contained notes and comments to help when he was teaching students. And in a time when a printing press was not yet invented, he greatly valued this book. When a novice decided that he was going to leave the hermitage, he stole Anthony's valuable book. When Anthony discovered that it was missing, he prayed that it would be found or returned to him. The thief did return the book, and in an extra step, he even returned to the order as well. During Anthony's own time, though, he was actually known for his eloquent teachings. Once, when he attempted to preach the true gospel to heretics who would not listen to what he was saying, he ended up going out and preaching his message to the fish. And this wasn't for instruction of the fish, but rather for the glory of God, for the delight of the angels, and for the easing of his own heart. He needed to get those words out. And when critics saw the fish begin to gather, they realized that they should also listen to what Anthony had to say. He was only 35 years old when he died and was canonized less than a year afterward by Pope Gregory IX. Upon exhumation some 336 years after his death, his body was found to be corrupted, but his tongue was totally incorrupt. So perfect were the teachings that had been formed upon it. My mom was always turning to St. Anthony to find things that had been lost, most often her car keys. And I grew up knowing that all I had to do to find lost things was turn to St. Anthony. Tony, Tony, look around. There's something lost that must be found. We relied on this so strongly that I'm actually surprised when it doesn't work. And it turns out, at least in my life, it is very rarely that that does not work. The other saint that figured heavily in my formative years was St. Patrick. My maiden name was Erin Margaret Kelly, and my dad's name was Patrick Timothy O'Brien Kelly, so it is no surprise that St. Patrick would loom large. He was born in Britain, but he was abducted by Irish pirates and taken to Ireland as a slave. During his 6 years in captivity, he found strength and solace in Christianity. He eventually escaped and returned to Britain, where he became a priest. He felt a calling then to return to Ireland and spread the gospel of Jesus to the Irish people. You know, there are many myths associated with his work there. He's often credited with driving the snakes out of Ireland. However, the reality is that Ireland's climate doesn't really support snakes, so it couldn't have been that. So some have proposed that this symbolized that he got rid of all the pagans in Ireland. But again, this is also partly a myth, as pagan practices continued long after his death. While Kelly green, is associated with St. Patrick, he actually most often wore a blue vestment. And there is no telling if he actually used the shamrock to teach his people the concept of the Trinity. Regardless of whether these myths are true, St. Patrick had a profound effect in Ireland. He established churches and schools and monasteries which helped Christianity to flourish. The blend of historical fact and legendary tales contributed to his standing as one of the most significant figures in Irish history. Growing up, we celebrated our Irish heritage, and most specifically, we would go to a special noon mass each St. Patrick's Day. The ancient order of Hibernians would march in dressed in Celtic kilts, playing the bagpipes, and since we were usually in school on that day, March 17th, it was kind of fun to be pulled out of class to go to Mass. That sounds so holy. But our school didn't know that after Mass, we went to some of the local pubs with our family, our family's friends, and their kids to spend the rest of the afternoon. St. Patrick and his message of God's saving love for us was a big part of my childhood and beyond.
Hi, my name is Jill Marquette. I'm the communications coordinator here at St. Mary Magdalene. Actually, the girl behind the camera. When Erin told me about this session of the Mosaic series, and she talked about kindness being a virtue that they were going to be discussing, instantly St. Francis of Assisi came to mind. He was an Italian saint, and he's often known for the prayer of St. Francis. It's referred to as the peace prayer. And while the prayer itself has been debated as far as the origin of it, it does reflect the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi, who is known for his commitment to peace, love, and humility. You may have heard the prayer. I'll just say a little bit for you. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. I happen to have this prayer hanging in my kitchen at home and reference it regularly to remind myself of the love and kindness Jesus would want us to live out in our daily lives.
To conclude this session, holiness is not something that we humans can attain through our own efforts. Rather, it's a result of a genuine relationship with God through faith in Jesus and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. May the enduring legacies of the saints inspire us to be instruments of kindness in our world, reflecting divine grace in every compassionate act.